All right, are we ready to continue on through the book of James this morning?
Yes.
Have you enjoyed the series so far?
Yes.
Yeah, I know. It's been rough though. It's been tough. James has been a little hard on us, hasn't he? I mean, James is not missing any words. He's being very clear about what we should do, not just be listeners, but be doers of his word. And the passage we've come to this morning, he really starts to nail it down. So I want to give us a little reprieve this morning, and I want to lighten the mood at least to begin. So let me ask you a question. How many of you like stories? Yeah, we all like stories, and stories come in all kinds of different forms. How many Harry Potter fans in the room? All right, good. You can all look around, see your people. How many of you prefer the movie over the book? How many of you prefer the book? Now, not just for Harry Potter. I just mean in general. How many of you prefer the movie over the book? Let me see that again. How many of you prefer the book over the movie? All right. How many of you are like, it depends. How many of you are like, I hate raising my hand in church, so I'm not going to do it, no matter what you ask me. All right, good. Well, this morning, we're going to do a little story time. I'm going to tell you 3 stories. And each one of these stories is going to have a theme that goes along with it. The first theme is going to be, it's a story of ultimate sacrifice. And the second story is going to be a story of profound risk. Someone who took a profound risk. And then the third story is going to be a story of practical faith. Now, you might be able to say that each one of these has each one of these elements, but each one of the stories this morning focuses on one of these elements. So our first story is a story of ultimate sacrifice. And this is a story that you've probably heard all of these stories, but that doesn't really matter, does it? In fact, sometimes we like hearing a story that we've already heard because we know how it's going to end. And so there's a little less suspense, but there's something about story that connects us with the characters in that story. We begin to care about what's happening to them, and we begin to identify what they're going through sometimes with what we're going through. We can learn some pretty significant lessons. Well, our first story begins, and it actually begins a little before this, but the part we're going to pick up for the story begins in Genesis chapter 15. So go all the way back to Genesis 15. And an interesting thing happens with our main character. Anyone have any idea who our main character might be in this story? Abram. At this point of the story, his name is Abram. And before we get to Genesis 15, what's happened is God has come to Abram and said, Abram, I want you to pick up and leave where you are, where you live. I want you to take your whole family and I want you to move. Because I've chosen you to be the father of a brand new nation. And I'm going to give you a brand new place for this brand new nation. And I'm going to give you a son, which is where we come to in this part of the story. God has come to Abram and he's about to give him the promise. It's the promise that is going to change everything. It not only changes everything for Abram, it changes everything for the nation to come. And you can trace that promise to now.
Right.
It impacts everything from this moment on. Here's the promise, Genesis 15:1. Sometime later, the Lord spoke to Abram in a vision and said to him, do not be afraid, Abram, for I will protect you and your reward will be great. But Abram replied, O sovereign Lord, what good are all your blessings when I don't even have a son? Since you've given me no children, Eleazar of Damascus, a servant in my household, will inherit all my wealth. You've given me no descendants of my own, so one of my servants will be my heir. Then the Lord said to him, no, your servant will not be your heir, for you will have a son of your own who will be your heir. Then the Lord took Abram outside and said to him, look up into the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have. And Abram believed the Lord, and the Lord counted him as righteous because of his faith. This is a good part of the story, right? Abram tells him, you're going to be the father of this great nation. And Abram says, no, I'm not. You haven't even given me, forget a whole nation of people. You haven't even given me one son. I have no descendants. My servant is going to inherit everything that I have. And God says, no, that is not how it's going to happen. And he takes Abram outside and says, I want you to look at the sky and count the stars. That's how many descendants you will have. Now, from where Abram is right now to that's a big leap, isn't it? That's a big jump from I've got nothing to I'm going to have everything. Have more than I could even imagine. Now, we look in hindsight. Has that happened? Yes. But Abram in that moment, and even in the moments afterwards, as you read the rest of this chapter, Sarah and Abram get impatient. I know none of us have ever gotten impatient with God. God's given us a promise, and we're like, yeah, God, I know, but you know what? I'll figure this one out for you. I got this one. And so they try and do things their own way, and Sarah actually comes up with this crazy plan. Abram, why don't you sleep with my maidservant, and that's how God will give us a son. It doesn't even make sense, does it? And Abram says, okay. And he does it. And they get a son. And God says, that is not how it was supposed to work. But eventually, what does God do? He gives them a son. But what's the key word there? Eventually. In God's own time, God gives Abraham, and he changes his name, gives Abraham and Sarah a son, and they name him Isaac. All right, now, so that's kind of the prelude to our story. But here's the real story in Genesis chapter 22. So the son has been given, the promise has been fulfilled. Isaac is growing up, he's becoming a young man, and now we come to the real story. And this is a story that will blow your mind. Genesis 22 says, sometime later, which means sometime later, once upon a time, God tested Abraham's faith. Right up front, what is God doing? He's testing his faith. Abraham, God called. Yes, he replied, here I am. Take your son, your only son, yes, Isaac, whom you love so much, and go to the land of Moriah. Go and sacrifice him as a burnt offering on one of the mountains which I will show you. Let's stop right there. What is God telling Abraham to do as a test of his faith? Not just kill his son. Sacrifice his son, his only heir, as a burnt offering. Anything right about that? No, in fact, Abraham could have very easily said, we've never done this, right? I don't think I heard God right. Because what I heard doesn't make any sense. I mean, first he's asking me to sacrifice the heir that he promised to me and finally gave me. God would never ask me to sacrifice something that he had already given to me, right? And not only that, but he's asking me to sacrifice him in a way that's wrong. I mean, should Abraham have been offering a human sacrifice on an altar? No. But look at what Abraham does. The next morning, Abraham got up early. He didn't just get up. Now, I'd have slept in that day. But he got up early. He saddled his donkey, took 2 of his servants with him, along with his son Isaac. Then he chopped wood for a fire for a burnt offering and set out for the place that God had told him about. On the 3rd day of their journey, by the way, as you read this story, just listen for the messianic tones. Listen for the things that hearken to Jesus' death and sacrifice on the cross. On the 3rd day, so first of all, there's wood, and there's going to be an offering. On the 3rd day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. Stay here with the donkey, Abraham told his servants. The boy and I will travel a little further. We will worship there, and then we'll come right back. He's got faith, though, doesn't he? Because who does he say will come back? We'll come back. So Abraham placed the wood for the burnt offering on Isaac's shoulders. That's an interesting image, isn't it? While he himself carried the fire and the knife, as the 2 of them walked on together, Isaac turned to Abraham and said, Father? Yes, my son, Abraham replied. We have the fire and the wood, the boy said, but where is the sheep for the burnt offering? God will provide a sheep for the burnt offering, my son, Abraham answered. They both walked on together. Can you even imagine what's going through Abraham's mind right now? Because he knows what's coming, right? He knows what's been asked of him. He knows what awaits him at the top of the mountain. Now, apparently Isaac isn't clued in on everything that's going on. So they didn't have a conversation, and halfway there, Abraham turned to Isaac and said, oh, by the way, you're the one. Why do you think Abraham didn't have that conversation? Probably two reasons. Yeah, he wanted to make sure his son didn't tail off. I'm what? I don't think so. Mom's calling. And number two, that's a hard conversation to have. That's a very difficult conversation. Anyone ever not had a hard conversation because it's a hard conversation? Right? Abraham avoids it. He's trusting God in this moment. When they arrived at the place, verse 9, where God had told him to go, Abraham built an altar and arranged the wood on it. Then he tied his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. All kinds of crazy going on there. He's tying his son up and he lays him on the altar. Now, what's the most surprising thing of all of that? His son does it. I can't even, when Kyle, I'm sorry, you're in another sermon. When Kyle was young, I remember trying to discipline him. You know what I mean? Discipline him. And I couldn't even get it done because he was squirming around too much. He didn't want the punishment. He didn't want to do it. In fact, I ended up just laughing and we couldn't even move on. And here Isaac is laying down on top of the altar of his own free will. How much does Isaac trust his father? Verse 10, and Abraham picked up the knife to kill his son as a sacrifice. Do not move past that. See, we know the end of this story. But I want you to pause in that moment for a second. Abraham has tied his one and only son up and laid him on the altar, and he picks up the knife and he raises it to do what? To plunge it into his son. To kill his son. Why? Because God said to do it. Is that faith? Whew. I can't even begin to imagine. But thankfully, at that moment, the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven, Abraham, Abraham. Yes, Abraham replied, here I am. And I have a note in the side of my Bible that says, it's a good thing he was listening to God. In that moment, it's a good thing he was listening. Instead of, and maybe he was waiting. We don't know. But as he was getting ready, the angel of the Lord says, Abraham. And Abraham says, yes, here I am. Don't lay a hand on the boy, the angel said. And imagine the wave of relief that fell over Abraham and Isaac. Do not hurt him in any way, for now I know that you truly fear God. You have not withheld from me even your son, your only son. Did Abraham pass the test? And this goes beyond God just saying, Abraham, would you sacrifice your son? And Abraham saying, yeah, absolutely, of course. God puts Abraham literally to the test and says, I want you to go up to the mountain. And he lets him go up the mountain. And I want you to put your son on the altar. And he lets him put his son on the altar. And I want you to raise the knife. And he raises the knife. And God in the last minute says, I don't want you to do it. I just wanted to know that you would. That's a test of faith, isn't it? I don't know about you, my faith has never been tested like that. And I hope, and my sons hope, it never will be. I can't even begin to imagine what was going through Abraham's mind. I mean, talk about ultimate sacrifice. Was Abraham willing to make the ultimate sacrifice for God? He was willing. Would Abraham have rather, those of you who are parents, you know the answer to this. Would Abraham have rather been laying down there, or would he have rather Isaac been laying down there? He'd rather himself. The question wasn't, Abraham, will you give up your life? The question is, will you give up the one thing you treasure the most in this world for me? Will you make the ultimate sacrifice as a test of your faith? And Abraham's answer was a resounding yes. The ultimate sacrifice. That's a good story, isn't it? Anything in there you might be able to take home with you today? First of all, has God ever tested your faith like that? He's never tested my faith like that. And I wonder all the time, every time I hear this story, I wonder, what would I have done? And there's all kinds of points along the way I'd have probably failed this test. I'd have either made up something, yeah, it wasn't God really, that was just me. It was something I ate last night. Woof. No more Taco Bell burritos for me, right? Or along the way I'd have thought, maybe God will come through, but I'll let Isaac in on the deal and maybe Isaac will bail. Or maybe I'll get up to the top of the mountain and think, God, let's have a moment of prayer and ask God, is this really the right thing? Abraham didn't do any of that. Abraham just was ready to make the ultimate sacrifice because God had said. And even later, he's like, I knew God would provide. I knew God, and what did God do next? He tells him, look, and there's a ram, and he sacrifices the ram on the altar in place of his son. A substitutional sacrifice. Again, more messianic prophecy. That's a great story. But I didn't tell you I was telling you one story. I got a couple more for you. Are you ready for story number 2? Yes. This story is a story about profound risk. And for this story, we've got to jump ahead quite a bit. So from Abraham's time, he says, I'm going to give you this great nation out of Isaac. And did that happen? Yes, and he gave them a great place. But the problem was there ended up being a famine in that great place, the promised land. And so the Israelites had to actually leave. Well, they didn't have to, but they did leave. And where did they leave to? Where did they go? They go to Egypt during this famine, and they stay in Egypt a little too long. In fact, a lot too long. And they become enslaved in Egypt. And then this guy by the name of Moses comes along. Anyone ever heard of Moses? And he says, set my people free. And he has this whole argument with Pharaoh. And God does a whole bunch of incredible things. And finally, Pharaoh kicks them out. And they're on the way to the promised land. They get lost for like 40 years. And finally, Moses dies. And Joshua takes over. And God tells Joshua, you are the man that will lead my people back into the promised land. And that's kind of where we pick up this story in Joshua chapter 2. So you got to move ahead through Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and then you'll get to Joshua. And God tells Joshua not to be afraid, to be strong, to be courageous, because I'm going to ask you to do some really crazy things. I'm going to ask you to do some things that you're going to think are nuts, but I want you to do it. I don't want you to be afraid. I want you to be strong. I want you to be courageous. I want you to lead my people, because my people tend to get a little cranky, and when things don't go the right way, they're going to blame you, but I want you to hold firm. But this isn't a story about Joshua. This is a story that happens inside the promised land. And you think about Abraham. How would you describe Abraham as a person? Okay, old. What else? A man of faith, right? Is that it?
Father of the nations.
He's the father of the great nation of Israel. I think you've hit the highlights. He's an old dude with great faith who birthed a great nation. Can we all agree on that? Yes. All right? And he's a patriarch of Israel. The second character in our story, the main character in our second story, couldn't be any further away from Abraham. The main character is not Joshua. In fact, the main character in this second story of profound risk is not a man, it's a female. And this female is not rich. She's poor. In fact, she's so poor, she's selling her body for money. She's a prostitute. And she's not an Israelite. What is she? Jericonian? I don't know. Is that what you call them? What's that? A Canaanite, right? I like Jericonian better. Okay, but yours is more technically correct. All right, so we're going to pick up this story in Joshua chapter 2. So here's what Joshua has done. Joshua is on the verge. He's ready. They're ready to enter the promised land, but he sends some spies in to check things out. How are things? What's the land like? Is this the kind of land we want? What are the obstacles standing in our way? So he sends spies in, and they get to the town of Jericho, which is this big city with a big wall around it. And I don't know how we're going to take this thing down. So we pick up the story in chapter 2. Then Joshua secretly sent out 2 spies from the Israelite camp at Acacia Grove. He instructed them, scout out the land on the other side of the Jordan River, especially around Jericho. So the 2 men set out and came to the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there that night. Now, I want a little more explanation of that story, but I don't get it. I don't know how they got there. I don't know why they got there. It's certainly not the kind of place you would expect them to be, right? Which maybe is exactly why they're there. But for whatever reason, they come to the house of this prostitute named Rahab, and they stayed there that night. But someone told the king of Jericho, some Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent orders to Rahab, bring out the men who have come into your house, for they have come here to spy out the whole land. Let's think about that for a second. What position is Rahab in? By the way, does Rahab have any power or influence? None whatsoever. She is a Canaanite woman, a female prostitute, and we can be all politically correct, and we can be all, my son hates this word, we can be all woke and all that we need to be and say today, no problem. This woman has as much power and as much right to be a human being as anyone else, but not in this day and age. Rahab was a nobody. And if the king says, bring those men out, what had Rahab better do? She better bring them out or risk what? Yeah, not just for her, but for her whole family. Is Rahab at risk right now? Would you say she's at profound risk? Does she have anything in common with the 2 men who are staying in her house? Does she have any connection with them? Does she have any reason to do anything they would say over anything that her king would say? No, in fact, what's the logical thing for Rahab to do here? Yeah, here they are. I have no attachment to these men. And for my own safety and for the safety of my household, here they are. But that's not what Rahab does. Rahab, verse 4, had hidden the 2 men, but she replied, yes, the men were here earlier. Liar, liar, pants on fire. But I didn't know where they were from. Lie number 2. They left the town at dusk as the gates were about to close. I don't know where they went. Lie number 3. If you hurry, you can probably catch up with them. Lie number, at least. Because verse 6 says actually she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them beneath bundles of flax that she had laid out. Rahab does the unthinkable. Rahab does the riskiest thing she could possibly do. She not only defies the king's order, what else does she do? She lies to him over and over and over. Yeah, they were here, but they were here earlier. I didn't know where they were from. I don't know where they're going. All I know is they left right as the gates were closing. If you hurry up, you can catch them. She's sending them on a wild goose chase. And so the king's men, but they're up on the roof. So the king's men, verse 7, went looking for the spies along the road leading to the shallow crossings of the Jordan River. Are they going to find them? No. As soon as the king's men had left, the gate of Jericho was shut. Before the spies went to sleep that night, Rahab went up on the roof to talk to them. And this is an important part of this story. Because Rahab now explains why she's done what she's done. You think about the spies in this moment. What did they probably think? Yeah, their goose is cooked. A lot of goose talk here. Wild goose chases, their goose is cooked. They're in trouble because they know Rahab is not one of them. She is a foreigner. She is a Canaanite. She has no allegiance to them. She has an allegiance to the king. And the king says, bring them out, but she hides them. They got to be thinking, what is going on here? And Rahab goes up to explain herself. She says, I know that the Lord has given you this land. We are all afraid of you. Everyone in the land is living in terror, which was great news for them. For we have heard how the Lord made a dry path for you through the Red Sea when you left Egypt. And we know what you did to Sihon and Og, the two Amorite kings east of the Jordan River, whose people you completely destroyed. No wonder our hearts have melted in fear. No one has the courage to fight after hearing such things. For the Lord your God is the supreme God of the heavens above and the earth below. Now swear to me by the Lord that you will be kind to me and my family, since I have helped you. Give me some guarantee that when Jericho is conquered, you will let me live along with my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all their families. And the spies said, we offer our own lives as a guarantee for your safety. If you don't betray us, we will keep our promise and be kind to you when the Lord gives us the land. Then, since Rahab's house was built into the town wall, she let them down by a rope through the window. Escape to the hill country, she told them. Hide there for 3 days from the men searching for you. Then when they have returned, you can go your own way. Before they left, the men told her, we will be bound by the oath we've taken only if you follow these instructions. Listen to this craziness. When we come into the land, you must leave this scarlet rope hanging from the window through which you let us down. And all your family members, your father, mother, brothers, and all your relatives must be here inside this house. If they go out into the street and are killed, it's not our fault. If anyone lays a hand on the people inside this house, we will accept the responsibility for their death. If you betray us, however, we are not bound by this oath in any way. I accept your terms, she replied, and she sent them on the way, leaving the scarlet rope hanging from the window. That's a moment of tension, isn't it? She says, guys, I believe, this is interesting, I believe that your God is going to win this battle. And Rahab has decided whose side is she on. She's chosen God's side. It's a profound risk, isn't it? And the risk doesn't stop here. They tell her, look, when we leave, make sure when things go down, make sure this rope, scarlet rope, is hanging out of your window, and make sure your entire family is here in this house, which was insane. Especially with a little foreshadowing. What's going to happen? The walls are coming down. Where's her house? In the wall. And she knows the wall has to come down at some point, some way, because that's the only way to get in. She doesn't know how it's going to happen. These men don't know how it's going to happen because God hasn't told anyone how it's going to happen. But we know the whole wall is going to come down, and God is saying, stay in the wall. Doesn't make sense, does it? Makes about as much sense as go sacrifice your son. Is the lesson here that sometimes God tells us to do things that make absolutely no sense to us? That's one lesson. And sometimes He asks us to make the ultimate sacrifice, doesn't He? And sometimes He asks us to take a profound risk. It's a good thing Rahab did. How does the story end? She follows exactly what these men say. She leaves the scarlet rope. Her entire family is there. In fact, if you want to pick up the rest of it, you just got to keep turning a little bit. I think it's Joshua 6, yes. Joshua chapter 6, verse 22. Meanwhile, Joshua said to the two spies, so now the entire wall has come down. All right? All of the walls of Jericho have collapsed. Remember they did the whole walk around the thing, VeggieTales with the kazoos, and they walk around the thing, and the whole wall falls down. Right? It falls down. Meanwhile, Joshua said to the two spies, keep your promise. Go to the prostitute's house and bring her out along with her family. The men who had been spies went in and brought out Rahab, her father, mother, brothers, and all the other relatives who were with her. They moved her whole family to a safe place near the camp of Israel. And then the rest of the story goes, and then they burned the whole place down. The only Canaanite, the only Jericonian who got out was Rahab and her family who were in that room. What a sight that must have been. Imagine being Rahab telling her family, we got to be in this room or we're going to die. What do you think their first response was? No, thank you. And then when the walls started to shake, first, they're watching them walk around, right? Oh, what is going on, Rahab? This is who you hitched your wagon to? Are you serious? Yep, stay in the room, stay here. And then when the walls start to shake, what do you think they were feeling in that moment? Terror, fear. I got to get out of here. The walls are coming down, Rahab. No, stay here. The promise was you stay here. No way, that's too risky. The walls are coming down, and as the walls crumble down, everything. Can you imagine this little sliver? And whose house is in that sliver? Rahab's. Does God come through? Yes. And he asks us sometimes to do things that make absolutely no sense. Sometimes he asks us to make the ultimate sacrifice. And sometimes he asks us to take profound risk. I cannot imagine being Abraham or Rahab. I'm fairly confident I would fail both of those. Now, if you're like me, we've got like 13 minutes left, you may be asking, Pastor, those are great stories. A, I've heard them before. B, I've seen them on VeggieTales. And see, what do they have to do with the book of James? You've gotten lost a little bit, right? Do any of those things have anything to do with the book of James? Yes and no. So now I want you to turn to James chapter 2, which is where we left off last week. See, James has been asking us some difficult answers. He's asking us some pretty serious questions about our faith. He's asking us, is your faith real? Is it genuine? And how can you know that it's real and genuine? And sometimes your faith is going to be tested, just like Abraham's faith was tested, right? Was Rahab's faith tested? Doesn't come out as clearly and say it, but was Rahab's faith tested? Yes, and we've got two completely different people on two completely different ends of the spectrum. A great man of God, who is the father, the patriarch of the nation of Israel, and Rahab the prostitute, who's none of those things. She's not an Israelite, she's a foreigner, she's female, she's a prostitute, she's nothing in the grand scheme of things. And both of them had their faith tested to see if it was genuine, just like James is telling us. So what does this have to do with what we're talking about? It has everything. And as James has been asking us these difficult questions about our faith, are you a doer of God's word? Or are you a listener? Was Abraham a doer or just a listener? He was a doer. Did he hear God? Yes, but then did he do it? In theory or in reality? In reality. Was Rahab a listener or a doer? A doer. God said, stay in this room. And she stayed in the room. And make sure your family's here. And her family was there. Now, did God come through? Yes. But the key question is, will we do what God asks us to do? And this passage, James 14 through 26, is kind of the culmination of everything that James has been teaching us. Verse 14. James says, what good is it, dear brothers and sisters, if you say you have faith, but don't show it by your actions? Can that kind of faith save anyone? What's the answer to that question? No. Suppose you see a brother or sister who has no food or clothing, and you say goodbye, have a good day, stay warm and eat well. What's the modern version of that, by the way? I'll pray for you. God bless. Right? God bless. I'll pray for you. You see someone who needs food or clothing, and you say, God bless you. Have a great day. I'll be praying for you. What does James say? So if you see that and you say that, but then you don't give that person any food or clothing, what good does that do? What good does your God bless you do? What good does your I'll pray for you do? Oh, easy, Pastor. But if you're not willing to give them food or clothing, what good does it do? Nothing. You may have been the answer to prayer already. Right? In fact, James, one who minces words, verse 17 says, so you see, faith by itself isn't enough. What? Unless it produces good deeds, it is dead and useless. You want dead and useless faith? What kind of faith do we want to have? Living, powerful, alive faith. That's the kind of faith that we want to have. Now, someone may argue, some people have faith. Others have good deeds. But I say, how can you show me your faith if you don't have good deeds? I'll show you my faith by my good deeds. And by the way, James uses the word deeds, works, and one other that I'll come up with here in a second, 12 times in these verses. 12 times he uses the word, a variation of our words, our actions. That was the other one. Words, our actions, our deeds, our works. He says, you want to show me your faith by what you say? I'll show you my faith by what I do. My actions will speak louder than your words. You say you have faith, for you believe that there's one God. Good for you. Even the demons believe this, and they tremble in terror. How foolish. Can't you see that faith without deeds is useless? Now here's where you're going to see things tie back together. Verse 21. Don't you remember that our ancestor Abraham was shown to be right with God by his actions when he offered his son Isaac on the altar? You see, his faith and his actions worked together. His actions made his faith complete. And so it just happened as the scriptures say. Abraham believed God, and God counted him as righteous because of his faith. But we just read it. When did God say that? Before Isaac or after Isaac? It was before, in chapter 15. Before he even had a son. Because Abraham said, I believe. And God said, I'm counting that as your righteousness. But then he had to prove it. It wasn't just what he said, it's what he said and then what he did. They worked together. He was even called the friend of God. So you see, we are shown to be right with God by what we do, not by faith alone. Verse 25, Rahab the prostitute is another example. She was shown to be right with God by her actions when she hid those messengers and sent them safely by a different road. Was it because she was an Israelite that she was saved? Was it because she said all the right things? What was it that made the difference? What she did. Just as the body is dead without breath, so also faith is dead without good works. James is saying the two things work together hand in hand. Can you have faith without good deeds? Can you have faith without good deeds? No. Would James say, can you have good deeds without faith? That's a different story, right? Well, here's the question. Are those deeds faithful deeds? What does James say you need? Both of these things. You need faith in the God who saves you. You need to declare it. You need to say it. And then you need to make sure that your life lives up to it. Abraham said he believed God, and then he put it on the line. Rahab said she believed God. She didn't even say it was her God. She believed in their God. Your God. But then she put her life on the line. There was an ultimate sacrifice and a profound risk taken. That's good stuff, isn't it? Now, some people say, and this whole section, by the way, gets all messed up when you bring Paul into the equation, because Paul said, works will not save you. It is faith alone. Wait a second. Paul says it's faith alone, and James says it's faith alone isn't good enough. Are these two guys disagreeing? No, they're just coming at it differently. Paul is saying your actions don't save you. It's your faith that saves you. It's your actions that come out of your faith. We got to get it in the right order. I don't do something to earn salvation. It's because I've been given salvation that I do something.
That's right.
Right?
Right.
And James is just very simply saying, you can say all day long that you believe in God and that there's one God. And he'd say, that's fantastic. Even the demons believe that garbage. That's not garbage. I shouldn't say that. Even demons believe that, but they don't put their actions where their faith is. They're not doing what your faith requires, are they? Here's what James really would ask. Are there some people who proclaim something who aren't living up to it? Yes. And the question is, are we one of those? Now, here's the real thing. I told you at the beginning I was giving you how many stories? 3 stories. How many have I given you? 2. I owe you one. Right? When am I going to give you that one? I'm going to give you that one now. Here's the question. Here's the third story. It's a story of practical faith. And that's what James is talking about here, isn't he? He's talking about practical faith. Is your faith, you see someone who needs food, what does your faith dictate you should do? Feed them. But you know what we often think of? Oh, I should pray. Because that's the spiritual thing to do, right? I'll pray for them. I'll pray for you, brother. Even if you do it, is that the thing you should have done? No. What should you have done? Feed them. You see them without clothing. What should you do? Give them clothing. Here's the big question is, what's your story? Whose story is number 3? Yours. It's your story. How is God putting your faith to the test? How and where is God asking you to make the ultimate sacrifice? How and where is God asking you to take a profound risk? Is giving somebody food, could that be a sacrifice? Yes. Could giving someone clothing be a profound risk? Can sharing your faith be risky? Yes. Can shoveling your neighbor's driveway be risky? Yep, still haven't done it. Now, I got all kinds of excuses, right? And God keeps making it snow. Every time it snows, it's my fault. Because I haven't shoveled that driveway. And Nita says, stop it. See, she's going to make me go shovel it. I don't know if that's the truth or not. I'm looking for that open door. Is it risky to share our faith? Yes. Is it risky to be a Christian in a world that says Christians are a bunch of hypocrites who don't know anything? They don't get it. Is it risky? Might you have to make a sacrifice? Might God ask you to make an ultimate sacrifice? Yep. I don't know what God's asking you to do. See, I can't tell you the third story because God is creating that story. He's telling that story in you. What is your story? What's the profound story that God wants you to tell? Here's what I'll tell you. You have a story. God is working out a story in your life. And He's going to ask you to put your faith on the line. Here's the thing. Put your action where your faith is what God is saying. You say you love me. Prove it. Love everybody. And I want you to take some love risks. I want you to put your action where your faith is. Where is God asking you to make a sacrifice? Where is He asking you to be a little risky? Is it always going to make sense to you? No. You know, how many years ago is it now? How many years ago when we went to Qdoba? She's like, last week. No, the time. 2008, I think it was. So how long ago was that? 12 years? 12, 13 years ago? God came and spoke to me, and I've told this story before, and asked me to step out of a full-time career, a 6-figure career in the corporate world, and said, I want you to put all that aside, and I want you to go into full-time ministry. And we just bought a brand new house. We built a house that we could barely afford on 6 figures. And God said, I want you to put all that aside. Was it risky? Yeah, I had 3 kids at home. I had a wife at home. Was it risky? Yes. But was God asking me to do it? Yes. Did it make any sense? No. Now, I'm not using that to say that's what you should do, or even to say that I was great. There were moments I was like, God, this is nuts. And there have been moments along the way I thought I made the wrong decision. Maybe I didn't do the right thing. But I know that God asked me to do that. And that's not the last risk God's going to ask me to take. What risk is God asking you to take? What sacrifice is He asking you to make? Here's what I'll tell you. If God tells you to do it, it's the right thing. And He's putting our faith to the test. Will you pass that test? Let's stand and pray. Father, I thank You for the ways that You push our faith to the brink, that You ask us to do things that sometimes make absolutely no sense. But when we put our faith on the line, when we put our action where our faith is, you always come through. There's never anything really for us to be afraid of. Father, I know there are people in this room, ways that you're working in this room, in people's hearts, in their lives, in their families, in ways I can't even begin to imagine. Maybe you're asking them to do something that is so far out of their comfort zone, they've even talked themselves out of it. Maybe you're asking them to make a sacrifice that makes no human sense. It makes no sense in the realm of humanity. We couldn't go to anyone, go to a financial advisor and say, should I do this? Should I give this? Should I give this up? Should I become a missionary? Should I enter into full-time ministry? Or maybe take a risk? Should I go talk to my neighbor who hates me, who I'm convinced hates me? Should I make some outward expression of love and care in a way that's gonna put my life or my faith or my family or my reputation on the line? There's all kinds of ways that's happening in this room. Father, I'm not even pretending to say I know what advice I would give in any one of those situations. I just pray that you'll tune our hearts into what you're asking us to do and help us to have the faith, a faith of an Abraham, a faith of a Rahab, who says, I don't care how crazy it sounds. I'm convinced God has asked me to do it, so I'm going to do what God has asked me to do, and we're going to see what God does to make it all work out. Father, give us that kind of faith. Let us be men and women, young and old, with that kind of faith. Let us put our faith to the test in very real, practical ways today and every day forward. And all God's people said, amen. Go put your action where your faith is. Have a fantastic day and a safe ride home.